Hey guys, it's Jazz Plans and welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how I create my videos, the intros, as well as the filters that I use and all that type of stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and go right into LumaFusion. Now I do have to say this is a $30 app. However, you can do these type of techniques on any other free apps like Villa or iMovie. Okay, so I'm just gonna dive right in, and the first thing that I'm gonna be doing is showing you guys essentially how I do those little scribbly doodle things that you see in the beginning of my intros. Also, the filters that I use for my intros and also for my main video. And I'm just going to be showing you guys how I color correct and all that type of stuff. I will be leaving timestamps down below, so in case you are curious or just want to look at a particular part, then you can just go ahead and fast forward to those parts. So the example video that I will be showing you guys today is going to be my Amanda Rach Lee review, so you can go ahead and check that out if you're curious, but I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. So as you can see, this raw footage is pretty dark, and I like to create this type of faded vintage look on my intros. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go with the Hipsa Wash filter, and as you can see, it created kind of a faded filter, more grayed out a little bit. And since it was dark, I'm just gonna go ahead and up the brightness and reduce the contrast and just play around with the saturation until I get it to my liking. And I just keep replaying until I'm satisfied with how it looks. Gamma is basically, well, I don't really know the terms, so don't quote me on that, but it kind of makes it a bit brighter and more faded, so I just play around with that until I like it. So once we're done with that, I kind of compare how it looks from the before and after. So once I'm happy, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy that into the rest of my videos. Now, as you can see, they're already cut and ready to go. It's not really a tutorial on essentially how I cut my videos or how I trim them, but more so how I do my aesthetic quote-unquote vibes. So yeah, basically I just copied the filter from the first video, and I'm gonna go ahead and paste them onto the remaining videos for my intro, and easy as that. They're all copied and pasted, ready to go, and then just rewatch it, and if you like it, then we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. I'm just gonna go ahead and resize this image down to 85. And the reason for this is because if you see some of my intros in my videos, there is a bright blue background that I like to display. So we're just gonna go ahead and put that on the background. And as you can see, I was kind of having a little bit of trouble here. I don't really know what happened, but I ended up fixing it. So no worries, just don't mind me doing that. I guess like my color palette was mixed up in my settings, which is why, and I ended up fixing it there, and it's all ready to go. But yeah, once you drag that image onto the foreground, or into the background, sorry, you want to drag your B-roll into your foreground, and it's all good to go. Now I'm going to go ahead and head into Procreate, and this is where I'm going to essentially draw those moving stars that you see in the beginning of my intro. Now I already have this as a template, so that's why it's already done, but if you're curious on what brushes I use the peppermint pencil. You can preview how it looks. Essentially, you want 3 different layers, tracing them all out, and then saving each layer separately, and then I will go ahead and go back into LumaFusion, and you'll see how it'll look when you go on back to editing your video. So I'm just gonna go ahead and save that into my files, and then go ahead and head back to LumaFusion, and I'm gonna show you guys how you can make them move. I'm just gonna drag that first layer onto there. I usually like to do it in about 0.10 seconds. You want to make it relatively a small time just so it looks more natural, and personally it looks better to me. And I'm just going to drag that up into the highest layer, and then repeat the same process to the other 2 images that we've done. alternating each one, and then I'm just gonna copy those 3 and just keep pasting until we reach the whole intro. So now once we replay the video, you can see that each star is moving one by one pretty fast on its own, and that's what we want. So pretty good. Now the next step that I'm going to be doing is creating that zoom effect that you see towards the end of my intro. And essentially what I like to do is we're going to do keyframes, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. So you can just look up a YouTube video on that because there are so many on how to do keyframes. So I usually like to backtrack about 6 frames to start my first keyframe, and then create a keyframe on the last frame of that video, and then zoom it into 100%, and that's going to create that zoom in effect on that video. So replaying it back, you can see that it zooms in quite nicely onto the transition portion, I would say, into the main content part. And yeah, so I'm just gonna trim everything else and make sure that everything looks good, trim the stars and all of that stuff. Now, as you can see, it was a pretty rough transition into the effects. Remember that I added the hipster wash effect, and since it's a bit rough, I'm just gonna go ahead and add a transition onto that, which is the cross dissolve, and I extend that last video so you don't see that like weird effect that it shows. And so now once you drag that out, you can see that the effect fades very nicely into the next video effect and transition. So now I'm gonna go ahead back to Procreate, and now I'm gonna go more in depth as to how I create my moving text. I like to turn on the drawing assist just because it helps me write a much neater and straighter font, I would say. And then I just go in with my monoline brush tool and then start writing what I want to write. In this case, it's the Amanda Rachel Planner Review. Using the Procreate tools, I just resize it and move it around, and then essentially just see what's best. And then once I'm satisfied with that, I'm just gonna rename those layers, and I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate that layer, and that's gonna go ahead and act as my drop shadow effect, which you'll see very soon. I'm just gonna go ahead and choose any color that I want. In this case, it's this bright or this light blue, and I'm just going to drag that color onto the text layer and essentially use the select tool to drag it down and create that drop shadow effect. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other text, which is the planner review. And essentially what we're gonna do is, since this is our first layer, I'm gonna create this 2 more times, grouping each one so I don't get lost. But yeah, I usually fade the first layer that you'll see here, and once I fade that, I'm just gonna trace over it, and then it's gonna create that moving effect. And the reason being is, even if you trace it, it's not going to be perfect and exact, and that's going to create the look that we want for the moving text. So I'm just going to fast forward here, and yeah, as you see, I'm just repeating the process 2 more times like what I did with the original. And then I'm going to go ahead and save each layer separately. And that is essentially the basis of how you create the moving text. And then we're just going to go ahead and move back into LumaFusion and do the same exact process as to what we did with those moving stars that you saw in the beginning. As you can see, it's a bit off-centered, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to resize that and then reposition it to our liking. So once again, I reduced the time and I pretty much lined it up to the stars, and just so that it moves at the same time as the stars, if that makes any sense. But yeah. And I usually try to cut it off at a time where it kind of looks okay, I guess. So I kind of cut that off right when my book enters the frame. And again, I'm gonna do the same thing where it zooms into the frame, aligning the same time as when the original background moves up as well. So here I'm just gonna head on into YouTube and search for a VHS overlay, and that's gonna give us that kind of vintage effect in the beginning of my intros that you've seen. This is one that I go to a lot, and then essentially you can just screen record this and import it into your video file. And since I already have that saved, I'm just gonna go ahead back right into LumaFusion. So here I'm just gonna choose one of the overlays that I already have, and you wanna put the layer above your main video layer. That way it doesn't kind of distort the color of your text images. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the blend mode to screen, and that's really gonna give us that look that we want for the vintage VHS overlay. Any other blend mode isn't gonna give you the same exact result, so screen is the best way to get that effect. And since it wasn't enough to fulfill the intro, I just duplicated it and then trim off the excess. Same thing again, I'm just gonna change the sizing and make it zoom in the same time as the rest of the layers, and then there we go. That is our finished intro. I know I kind of went a little bit fast, but that is just the gist of it. But yeah, anyways, I hope you guys like this tutorial on how I make my aesthetic kind of looking intros. And with that being said, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!